Going into Season 1, the Dallas Fuel were predicted to be the best team that weren't completely poaching a top Korean roster. Why? Because they poached the best Western roster. I mean, we're talking about Envious here. This is the only Western roster to ever win Apex, the team that had won Overwatch contenders prior to the league, and it wasn't even close. The roster was superstars like Taimu, Effect, Mickey, Coco, and Harry Hook. And if some of the best to ever play the game wasn't enough, they were adding on promising streamer talents like Seagull and X2C on top. Like, are you kidding me? This is stacked. Dallas is going to be a top 4 team at least. And then Season 1 happened, and we were treated to the biggest dumpster fire that Overwatch League has ever seen. The Fuel walked on the stage, weren't a top 4 team, and completely collapsed. Maybe some of the new pieces that the team introduced messed up the team's synergy. Maybe they weren't used to dealing with a failure of this magnitude. Maybe they just weren't as good as they used to be. All we know from the bits and pieces that we got is that it wasn't any more fun to be on the Fuel than it was to be a fan of them. Weekly, if not daily, we got reports that detailed a toxic environment, infighting between the players, heads rolling left and right, players like Effect being forced to leave for the sake of mental health. It was a kind of gruesome explosion where you cover your eyes but can't help but peek between your fingers. But in Stage 4 of Season 1, hope emerged. Arrow was signed on as the team's new head coach. He helped to turn around the defeated mentality of the team. With an improved mindset and a little bit of luck with the meta, the Dallas Fuel qualified for the Stage 4 playoffs. Of course, it was too late to qualify for the postseason, but we rejoiced all the same. The Fuel were back. Envious was back. Dallas had provided fans with a glimmer of hope, a promise of better things to come if they just stuck with the team. So, did they deliver? I'll give them this, Dallas didn't shy away from making moves over the offseason. In his first go-around with the team, Arrow was kind of forced to work with what he had. But now, with a new season on the horizon, he had the opportunity to build a team to his vision. And personally, I'd imagine that the organization gave him a lot of creative freedom. The first thing that Arrow did was bolster the coaching staff around him with 2 new assistant coaches. The first was Tickety, who had most recently worked as a coach for FNRG FE, a team that would eventually go on to become the core of the Houston Outlaws. Interestingly, Arrow worked with this team, and therefore with Tickety before he moved on to Fusion University, so there was definitely a level of familiarity there. And the second was Jane. Now, of course, we're all probably familiar with Jane. Going into Season 2, he was a very popular streamer. In fact, I'd go as far to say that it was at this point where he was at the height of his Twitch streaming career. Jane is most well known for his Overwatch coaching VODs that are simultaneously entertaining and educational. But as far as more formal experience goes, Jane had recently coached the Canadian Overwatch World Cup team to a 3rd place finish, and before that had coached for an Australian contenders team called Tainted Minds. They didn't do very well, but experience is experience all the same. So next, Dallas looked at their roster and made quite a few changes. First, let's talk about who they dropped. Seagull ended up leaving the team in order to focus on content creation and streaming, which makes total sense given his following and how stressful Season 1 must have been for him. If you don't remember, Seagull is a flex DPS player who ended up having to learn how to play D.Va in like a month because Mickey wasn't doing good enough and was off fulfilling his destiny on Brigida anyways. Like, that is an awful situation to be in. Next, they announced that support player Chips Hyan would be leaving the team entirely, while tank player Coco would move to an assistant coaching position. It's always super unfortunate to see these former Envious players leave the league, but given their performances in Season 1, I don't blame Dallas for making these decisions. On a lighter note though, let's talk about who they added. Closer was the first new player to join the team, and this was a big pickup because at the time, Closer had something that no other free agent had, and something that everyone was striving for: the title of champion. Yeah, it feels like forever ago, but he won Overwatch League Season 1 with the London Spitfire. The only problem was that he wasn't on the stage. Closer was the designated 7th man for London. He backed up Nust on main support, but he rarely saw stage time in the second half of the season, especially after the Spitfire made the decision to commit to their starting 6. Nevertheless, Closer had a winning mentality, and was surely itching for the chance to start. He found that chance with Dallas. The next player to join was RCK. In Season 1, off-tank was probably Dallas's biggest problem. Mickey, while always a fantastic teammate of course, just wasn't a very good D.Va or Zarya on stage, and his weaknesses as a player got exposed over and over again. So grabbing RCK, a solid off-tank who had found success in Contenders Europe as a member of Team Giganti, filled that hole really well. Like, a tank line of OG and RCK was definitely something to worry about. And the final pickup that Dallas made this offseason was Zachary. This is another player that Arrow had extensive personal experience with, as a member of Fusion University. Zachary was making waves in the Overwatch community, both in being a part of Fusion University's legendary win streak in Contenders North Korea, and by being picked up as a member of 2018's Team USA, a team that was, again, coached by Arrow. I think you're starting to see a pattern here. The coach definitely saw something in him. Here's kind of the interesting bit though. Despite Zach playing mostly hit-scan heroes on Fusion Uni, mostly known for his Tracer, Sombra, and Widow, Zach was signed onto Dallas as a flex DPS player. This was kind of odd, as the community had never really seen Zach on a flex DPS role. I mean, I guess it's good that he wasn't on Hitscan, because their other DPS were AKM, Effect, and Taimu, which is already a really crowded Hitscan line. But with a lack of other options on the roster, and Team USA's disappointing World Cup performance leaving a bad taste in their mouths, fans just weren't sure if Zach was truly a flex DPS player. They weren't sure if he was going to be able to keep up with the insane DPS in the rest of the league. But other than that, Dallas had a pretty strong roster on paper, especially with good pieces like main tank OG and flex support Unko returning. But how did the fans feel about this? On that note, I'm proud to introduce to you my newest feat of engineering, the Dallas Fuel Optimism Meter, or DFOM for short. DFOM, how are things looking for the start of the season? Yeah, most people rated the Fuel mid to low tier to start, because, well, to be honest, even though they had all these shiny new pieces, no one could trust the organization to make a team after last season. It was a nightmare for Fuel fans, and in order to regain their trust, they would have to perform on the stage. To their credit, the Fuel didn't look too bad to start the season. They had a pretty good handle of how they wanted to play in a GOATS meta. OG in particular was the star at this point. Not many people would argue with you if you said that he was a top 5 Reinhardt. His game sense and his ability to squeeze every ounce of value out of the main tanks were truly admirable. Meanwhile, newcomer RCK was equally as impressive, but not necessarily on the standard D.Va. While his D.Va was alright, the Fuel and RCK were probably the first team in Overwatch League to seriously experiment with Sombra Goats on stage, and they were able to do so because of RCK's flexibility. As far as the rest of the team, Zach and the support were alright at this point. They weren't the best, but they were doing their jobs fine, so there's not too much to say yet. However, I want to take a moment to focus on their hit-scan position, which of course, in GOATS, meant the Zarya. As mentioned before, the Fuel had 3 players who could potentially be filling the spot, which meant Dallas had a big roster decision to make, and they had to make it fast in order to make sure they could start building synergy. In the first couple of games, the team actually had Effect starting, playing Zarya, and this was awesome to see him back on the stage, especially after all of his mental health issues last season, but Effect... Well, for those who forgot, Effect was by far Dallas's most explosive DPS player in Season 1. He was the kind of guy who could hard carry the team through fights, and this was all well and good on heroes like Tracer, Widow, and Genji, but playing a Zarya in GOATS is a totally different beast. Effect's aggressive playstyle would haunt him, as he consistently went for flanky hero plays that often blew up in his face. You just can't solo carry in this meta. After a few games of this, the team started subbing him out for AKM, who saw much better results. Unlike Effect, AKM did a much better job about playing with his team, about being a cog in their machine instead of trying to be the entire engine. This led to some insane stats from the Frenchman, and before long, AKM had taken the starting spot from Effect completely. And I want to say real quick, that's kinda cool. After getting memed on relentlessly last season due to the whole AKM Blade fiasco, the guy saw his chance and took it, and regained a lot of respect this season. Props to you, AKM. So, thanks to some really strong tank play, Dallas earned some quality wins this stage over highly rated teams like the Fusion and the Dynasty. While Dallas would fail to qualify for the stage playoffs by just a couple of maps, let's see what DFOM is saying. Yeah, the fanbase was actually optimistic, as foreign as that emotion might be. Dallas had proven that they have the pieces to succeed. They had the right idea, they had good teamwork, good individual play, and they were so close to taking that last step and joining the elites once again. Between stages 1 and 2, we saw the Fuel make a few more changes. Firstly, the team unfortunately said goodbye to Coco and Effect, both of which were retiring from the Overwatch scene. While Effect would stay with the Fuel for a while longer as a streamer, it was sad to see 2 more members of the original Envious leave the league altogether. And while Effect's impact on Overwatch League itself was minor, his impact on the game in its earliest stages won't be forgotten anytime soon. Moving forward, the Fuel completed a trade with the Boston Uprising for their off-tanks, RCK for Note. Now at the time, this was a move that actually made a lot of sense for both teams. Dallas wanted a team that was committed to playing the meta, while Boston wanted to experiment with more off-meta comps. RCK was known for having only a decent diva, but he was flexible and could play a good Sombra, while Note was seen as a really good diva, but didn't have the flexibility that RCK did. This was a switch to better complement the styles of both teams, and with Note fitting in with the roster fairly easily, Dallas set off to conquer Stage 2. And conquer they did. Note's diva was on full display this stage, making the Fuel management look like absolute geniuses for picking him up. Other than that, Stage 2 was mostly Dallas just building upon what I had already mentioned in Stage 1. OG was still playing great, AKM was melting the opposition. The supports were still pretty average, but that's no big deal when the tanks are doing so well. And of course, Stage 2 was incredibly significant for the Fuel, because they got to go to Dallas for their homestand. Not only was it the Fuel's first time playing in front of a home crowd, but it was the first time that Overwatch League got to travel outside of the Blizzard Arena, barring the Grand Finals of course. And it was electric. The Fuel certainly knew how to put on a show, with a great looking setup for the players and Blue Flame putting an exclamation mark on the team's entrances. But more impressive than that in my opinion were the fans. The crowd was passionate and intense. Listening to them roar every time the Fuel would win a fight was exhilarating as a fan, and surely emboldened the Fuel in their games against the Valiant and the Outlaws, of which they won both.
With this roster, already Raucous taking so much damage to put forward. OG in the first swing! He takes him down. He finds first blood. That's going to be a breakup on the Dante's mech as well. His point going down. An absolute slaughter in favor of the Dallas Fuel.
This was the peak of the season for Dallas. Going on stage in front of a passionate home crowd and staking their claim on the city by delivering 2 statement wins. Hearing a crowd of thousands chanting your name, that's the kind of thing that esports hopefuls dream about. And watching OG getting a little teary-eyed after the game only confirmed that for me. This was a moment where dreams were realized, and for that weekend, the Dallas Fuel were on top of the world. And according to DFOM, so were their fanbase.
I've never, after becoming a pro gamer, ever believed that I could be standing in front of a huge crowd like this, getting all the love and support from all of these amazing fans. So thank you all, and I love you.
However, even though Dallas gave us a reason to look forward to homestands in Season 3, there was trouble brewing under the surface. Yes, Dallas went 5-2 this stage, and that's great, but they never beat an opponent that had more than 3 wins in Stage 2. In fact, 2 of the teams they beat, the Mayhem and the Outlaws, went winless this stage. So while that brings down the average a lot, having your wins being against teams with an average of 1.4 wins themselves, that's worrying. Fans were also starting to question Zachary again, singling him out as the weakest link on the team. And of course, while the Fuel did qualify for the stage playoffs, they got absolutely wiped by the Vancouver Titans in the quarterfinals, proving that Dallas still hadn't taken that crucial step to be able to compete with the best in the world. and while they were still positioned well for a playoff appearance, they needed to make some crucial strides as a team if they wanted a chance at the trophy. And then, the opposite happened. I'd like to imagine Dallas' season as a balloon. They started the season off with a decent amount of air, and as the season went on, the balloon continued to slowly inflate, getting a little bit bigger, and a little bit bigger, and then after the mid-season something happened. Something or someone took a needle to Dallas' balloon. It was a small poke, but air started leaking out, and no matter what the fuel did to try and save it, there was nothing that they could do. By the time the season had ended, the balloon was completely empty. Sure, in hindsight, Dallas' schedule was very back-heavy. Like, get this, in both stages 3 and 4, the Fuel had 6 out of their 7 games be against teams that would eventually make the postseason. However, here's the argument about that, the argument that I'll make every time. These are the teams that you need to be beating, or at least putting up a good fight against if you want to make a case for yourself in the playoffs. And that just didn't happen. Not only did Dallas lose, but other than a victory against a lowly Justice in Stage 3, they got destroyed. It became unusual for the team to win maps, let alone matches. And even more alarming was that with every loss they took, they seemed to slip further and further into this lethargic state, where they just lost their drive. OG was consistently getting outplayed by the opposing Reinhardts. Note was consistent, but consistently average. Unko and Closer were almost completely inconsequential to the outcome of any matches, and the DPS line couldn't confirm kills as consistently as they needed to. The swagger that Dallas had on full display in the first 2 stages faded quickly, to the point where it felt like the team's characters were walking through syrup. They just looked that slow. OG in particular, who was so explosive at the start of the season, faded to a shell of his former self. This forced the team to try promoting main tank Trill from Team Envy, and while it was awesome to see another Aussie in the league, he just wasn't the kind of guy that was going to turn this team around by himself. And then there's Zachary. Deserved or not, the murmurs that were present in Stage 2, calling Zach the weakest link, turned into near riots at this point. It didn't matter whether he was on Brig, or Mei, or Hanzo, his play was put under the microscope, and every mistake he made was taken as proof that he was the problem. While I obviously don't think that Zach deserved all of the criticism thrown his way this season, like no one does, I have to admit that his flex DPS was below average, and that might be a nice way of putting it. Do I have to look at DFOM again? Alright, here we go! Yep, figures as much. Look, you saw the transition. I'm not gonna bother making a separate section for Stage 4. There's honestly no point. It was just a continuation of Stage 3, a complete collapse. By the time that Dallas would have been making their final playoff push, it just felt like they were going through the motions, trying to get it over as soon as possible. Not even a rare switch to time would save them this time. Dallas' record went from 9-5 at the mid-season break to 10-18 at the end of it all. Yeah. In 15th place, there was no chance at postseason glory for the Dallas Fuel. In Season 1, the Fuel were a glorious dumpster fire. There were fireworks going off constantly, and every week it felt like another player or staff member would get caught in the crossfire. It was disgusting. It was a terribly run team. But in a twisted way, it was really entertaining. Sure, their failure was certain at the end of Stage 1, but at least you could have expected a good show. But in Season 2, we got the opposite. Dallas went out with a whimper. And if I'm being honest, they were kind of boring. Other than the occasional snide comment from Jane on Twitter or on his stream, Dallas was pretty drama-free this season. The expectation, of course, is that with a better team environment, they would perform better on the stage. But it didn't really happen. Why? Well, some people like to blame Zachary, some people like to blame Arrow, but as usual, in these cases, it is short-sighted to blame a single person. If I was to make a guess, Dallas was riding high after their first two stages. Their homestand was awesome, they were in a good spot for the playoffs, optimism was amazing, and then the schedule for Stage 3 revealed Dallas for the pretenders that they truly were. Compared to the actual playoff teams, they were not as skilled, they were not as prepared, and they were not as confident. It really sucks that Dallas fans ended up getting led on by a team that really wasn't as good as promised, but at least the city is used to it. That's why my final grade for the Dallas Fuel in Season 2 of the Overwatch League is a D. Thank you all so much for watching. I hope you enjoyed looking back at the Dallas Fuel season as much as I did. How do you think the Fuel will do in Season 3? Their first two games were something? Let me know your thoughts in the comments. As always, if you enjoyed this video, leave a like, and make sure to subscribe with notifications on to know every time I upload a new video. I'd really appreciate it. It's just 5 teams to go. Let's see who we'll be looking at next. Guangzhou? Alright, this is a team that actually really intrigues me, so I'm excited to look closer into their season. I'll see you for their episode, but until then, don't get tilted.